It's our community. I'm Mary Davidson, and welcome. Another of our neighbors I'm sure that you already know. His name is Dr. Burdett Loomis, and he is the professor of political science at the University of Kansas and the authority in politics in Kansas. The man to whom everyone says, Burdett, what do you think? That must be kind of heady, Burdett.
A lot of time, most of the time, I'm surrounded by people who actually do know more than I do. So I'm quickly disabused of any kind of great ego.
Well, I was talking to Burdett, and I said, well, I noticed that you went to Carleton, and all the smart people go to Carleton. And he said, yes, I found out quickly there were a lot of people that were as smart or smarter than I. So we are constantly being humbled, I think.
Yes, indeed.
I want to get right to this because there's a lot going on in Kansas. Some of the items that we want to discuss are the budget, the Medicaid restructuring, school finance, redistricting, and I want to start with the income tax. Governor Brownback would like to do away with the Kansas income tax. First of all, do you think he'll succeed in that? I know he's just kind of nibbling away at it, but if he succeeds at that, where is the money going to come from?
In his theory, he would reduce the income tax in the next couple of years and then gradually eliminate it as the growth that he would hope for would come to pass. We would have more sales taxes, to be sure, more revenue in sales taxes, and more revenue in property taxes. So that's the theory. But honestly, as of today, I was just talking to a lobbyist, a former legislator, who thought that the governor's tax cut bill might not even be introduced in bill form. It has received a tremendous amount of pushback over the last 2 weeks since he gave his State of the State address, and even among natural allies, Republicans in the House, they have an alternative bill up for consideration. And so I think honestly that the governor's particular bill is kind of in disarray right now.
That's really interesting. Do you think the pushback from his own party has come because they don't want the burden to fall on sales and property tax?
I think that many of them voted 2 or 3 years ago for a temporary sales tax increase that was of a penny. 0.6 of a cent was supposed to go off next year, and I'm not sure they thought that their contract with their constituents was that this would be temporary. Now the governor is asked to make that permanent. Beyond that, his own administration did an analysis and reported that the only net losers, and this is according to the Revenue Department, were the poorest 20%. So having a tax system that is going to increase the wealth of particularly the wealthiest Kansans and eat away at the resources of the poorest Kansans is hardly a great way to get this started.
That's not a great to introduce yourself as a popularity. What does the alternate proposal look like? Do you know?
The alternate proposal is of the Republicans in the House is to go back to 5.7% statewide sales tax, do away with some exemptions. It's a simpler proposal, I think, but it also does away with the earned income tax credit, which is very helpful for the working poor, and by all odds, almost every analysis demonstrates that this is one of the best anti-poverty programs around. So I think that there's going to be, even on that one, a fair amount of pushback. And there are so many items on the agenda, as you alluded to at the beginning. If something really runs into a strong headwind, it simply may just be pushed off the agenda, at least for this session.
Well, and if Kansas does not sustain the growth that the governor hopes it will, then we have created for ourselves a rather of a muddle.
Part of the strength of Kansas over the years has been very steady. You know, no booms, no busts, and we have this tax system that it's certainly not perfect. We tax food for groceries, for example.
Right, yeah.
Really a bad idea. But we get income from property taxes, from sales taxes, from income taxes, this three-legged stool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people in public finance see that as the most stable kind of system. If one goes up or goes down, the other may stay steady. So for example, Florida has no income tax. So when the recession hit, tourism dropped, construction dropped, and sales tax revenue fell off a cliff.
All of their other sources of income.
And to say nothing of property taxes
Yeah.
down there. And so it made for far deeper cuts than you'd ordinarily have. Now I think there's an intellectual argument to reduce income taxes. Maybe you do it across the board and then cut a lot of exemptions. And the governor, I did move in that direction. But for every exemption, you've got an interest group that wanted that exemption. And then I think you have the whole question of placing way more responsibility back on county and city government. And I think that would happen in spades in Johnson County. If you cut the income tax, so much of the responsibility for programs is going to fall on the county, on the city level, and the pressure to raise property taxes is going to be substantial, and that would occur with school finance as well. Yeah. And I think many people say, oh, the people in Johnson County, they will raise their taxes. But clearly there's a limit.
There is clearly a limit. And the other thing that Johnson Countyans get very worked up over, and not without cause, is that so much of the sales tax that's generated here goes back to Topeka.
I was just talking to my interns. I have a group of interns in Topeka, and we are combining KU with several students from Fort Hayes. And so I was asking one of the KU students about who comes from Johnson County, what's the relationship between Johnson County and the western part of the state? Well, Johnson County people just think that the western part of the state thinks of us as a bank, and it's kind of true. Now, we are a state. We're one state, and
as much as we hear that we're just going to secede.
Right. No one's seceding. But I do think that there has to be some kind of equity, and the tax reduction, the income tax reduction, the silent implied element there is that local property taxes will rise.
And that's a hot button, Burdett.
And
that is a hot
some
button.
Places can afford it. But there are many places in western Kansas who couldn't afford it on their best day.
No, that is true. Let's migrate to immigrate. The thrust seems to be to tighten up the immigration laws in Kansas. Where are we on that, and what do you think is going to happen?
The immigration laws are essentially federal. Yes. And that's one of the big issues.
Well, but Arizona didn't
that
feel
Chris
that way.
Kobach has helped Arizona, Alabama write laws that have been increasingly restrictive and have used more state enforcement powers and required states to enforce laws aggressively. I think there are a couple of parts to this. One is the voter ID law, which is I think somewhat discriminatory against Hispanics, but by and large that has survived constitutional challenges. There's some issues there. I think that immigration generally, there is a real issue. You have people who are here illegally, and that seems like a straightforward kind of question. But then, as the governor is discovering, his administration has now cut food assistance to the children of illegal immigrants. The children are citizens.
That's right.
So, is that fair? There are complexities here that are really great. Do you send people back who have children here?
Well, then you split up families.
You split up families, and you have whole questions of family values. I think one of the unseen elements here is that immigration enforcement has been increasing. The Obama administration has deported more people than the Bush administration, at a much higher rate at least. And the recession has meant that there are substantially fewer illegal immigrants.
Because they have not been able to work, so they've gone
Right,
home. Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
And even within the Republican Party, you see someone like Gingrich saying, look, we have some obligation to keep families together, whereas Mitt Romney says, oh, deport them all. Well, the idea of deporting 11 million people like that is...
That's a little bit daunting.
Well, it's not daunting. It's just, as public policy, it's impossible.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happens, of course, is that you see, and again, a lot of this occurs within the Republican Party. The social conservatives, the Tea Party people say, you know, oh, they're taking our jobs. The business side of the Republican Party is often either silent or defensive about having, honestly, undocumented workers because they rely on them. And so you end up, say, in Washington State with fruit on the ground, and people say, well, Americans should take those jobs, but they don't. And the farmers are highly realistic about this. If anyone's realistic about things like
the farmers
this,
are,
the
because
farmers.
those are the migrant laborers.
You know, people will come for a day or two, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a really difficult issue. What happens is that it's often played for political advantage, as in the case of Arizona with Joe Arpaio, the sheriff in Phoenix, and someone like Kobach, who honestly is in my opinion, is using the immigration issue, the voter registration issue, to further his own political career.
The governor has chosen to follow a rather aggressive agenda. There are risks in doing that. Do you agree? And if you agree, what are the risks that he might have considered as he has chosen to?
Well, let's look. He has indeed set out a very vigorous agenda. First, the income tax, school finance. Either of those, it would be a huge issue in 1 year. You mentioned at the outset of the program Medicaid reform, which is an administrative operation. You also have...
Now, he can do that without legislative...
He has to he probably would have to have some kind of he may need an executive reorganization order, but he can do it. The problem is it's very political, and so you might think he could do it technically by executive order, but honestly, you have to think of it almost legislatively. You know, a lot of people are saying, look, what you're proposing to privatize much of this has been tried in other states and has not worked very, very well. Mm-hmm. So here's what the benefits for the governor are that he may get a lot of this passed. He's got a very strong majority in the House, a less certain majority in the Senate. But even if he doesn't, he has about 8 or 10 Kansas senators, including someone like John Vattel, Terry Huntington from this area, mm-hmm. who already have challengers. And the subtext of this legislative session is the conservatives in the Senate and some conservatives in the House versus many Senate moderates. And so if the Brownback administration doesn't get much of its legislative package, you'll see, I'm sure, this summer in primary campaigns, people pointing to Huntington, to Vattel, to Steve Morris, Vicki Schmidt, a whole raft of these moderates, and say they're the problem. If we have a more conservative Senate, then we could get these changes done. We could do the income tax, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you think the conservatives are going to be able to knock the moderates out?
I honestly don't know.
Don't know. You have no prognostication.
No, because we don't even know what the district's going to look like
yet.
That's right. And
that's another big issue.
And the second thing there is that you have the possibility, in the wake of Citizens United, of the ruling on corporate money or anonymous money coming in with separate organizations. You have the potential for, say, $2 or $3 or $5 million coming in these Senate races from out of state or maybe from in-state, but essentially anonymously in big contributions, and that would change the nature of these Senate races tremendously. So he's got two things going for him. One, he may get a bunch of his agenda items. Secondly, if he doesn't, he may then have issues to knock out a bunch of conservatives. If he does neither of those, then the risk is very great that Governor Brownback will really be seen, even though he has lots of Republicans in the State House, as not really being very effective. And already, I think the last 2 weeks have put a lot of cracks in the veneer of the Brownback administration as really being able to control things, because they didn't go out and do a lot of the pre-selling, the consultation that virtually every other administration, whether it's Sebelius or Graves or Mike Hayden or whoever, have done in the past.
Well, there was a recent survey at the Docking Institute at Hayes, and his approval rating, I think, is in the low 40s.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Survey USA has a similar finding. And so Senator Brownback, when he was senator, his approval ratings were never super huge. He always won by a lot. It's a very Republican state. I think that it's more problematic for a governor, though. House members can look and say, well, the governor's not doing all that well. Do I really need to go along with him? And in fact, what we're seeing right now is many pretty solid conservative Republicans saying, wait a minute, we're not talking Tea Party people, we're not talking people who were elected in 2010, but very solid long-term conservatives saying, do you really want to change this? What's wrong with this program that's been operating very successful? Juvenile justice, the developmentally disabled, things like that.
So you think he may back off of some of this?
Oh, I think it's almost certain that the governor will back off a variety of things for the size of the agenda and the fact that he's getting so much pushback. And you saw that with the arts that he eventually did. He eventually
$200,000.
He eventually did cut the arts, but now he's kind of put a fig leaf.
$200,000.
Well, 200, but that's also with the Film Commission and
well, that is a small fig
and
leaf.
he does, and he closed SRS offices and backed off of that. He appointed an IT guy, information czar, who had a bogus degree. He backed off that. And what you see is a pattern of not being very thorough in thinking through the political consequences and how you get stuff done.
It seems to me he's testing the waters publicly.
And that's okay. And that maybe that's exactly what he's planning on doing. But it's often he's often surprised, I think, at the amount of pushback.
Do you think the redistricting plan will change anything politically as it happens?
Well, when we talk about redistricting, you're talking about really three different redistrictings: the House, the State Senate, and then the U.S. House of Representatives. The easiest, but perhaps the most controversial, will be the U.S. House of Representatives. We'll see what happens there. All kinds of weird maps have been floated. My guess at the end of the day is that Johnson and Wyandotte County will be the third district. It will be a district that will be a little more Republican, a fair amount more Republican, because Lawrence will be gone.
I was going to say they're going to take half of
Lawrence will be gone
away.
from it. And it's a district that someone like Kevin Yoder could probably win forever.
I think so.
And so I think that that it becomes a little more Republican.
But it's the first district that's so huge.
Well, the first district is very huge, but that's a Republican district. Apparently, the whole Wichita district and the environs, whereas 20 years ago it was fairly Democratic, has now become a Republican stronghold. So that really leaves the second district, and Lawrence will be in the second district. So I'm sure that Lynn Jenkins, the second district congresswoman, will want as many Democratic areas out of her district as possible. And that's where you get some of these strange maps, like the first district coming around and wrapping down to take a little of Wyandotte County. My guess is that sanity will prevail. And after all, the Republicans hold every statewide office, all four congressional seats, 32 to 8 in the state Senate, 92 to 33. How much more can they want? To tell you, I mean, this is a very, very Republican state.
district, yes. Well, you know, there is a risk in overreaching, and there is a risk in that sometimes has the potential to become explosive. So you have to be careful as you overreach and as you make major changes. And you know, to discuss the education, the details haven't really washed out yet. So I know that there is a big change afoot, but we'll have to wait till the details come out, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw the outlines of it in the
Yeah.
in the governor's proposals, and eventually he wants to rewrite what it means to get an equal education. Legislatively, he wants to get out of the any court fight. But in the end, as we were talking about with the income tax, I think he's going to place more and more responsibility back on local school districts. And even if there's some equalization, my sense is that local property owners are going to be the ones that will bear the burden.
Is Newt an anomaly?
Oh, Newt is an anomaly. I mean, yeah. Now, whether it's yes, Newt is singular to be sure. And the very fact that we don't have to ask if Newt Gingrich, sure. We're sitting here in the middle of this campaign. Who knows what will happen in 2 days, 4 days, a week? No betting person 6 months ago would have given you much hope for Newt.
He was carrying his own suitcase.
And
yes,
and he still has a lot of baggage.
Yeah,
but
right.
but I think that as we go forward here, one of the things that's demonstrated is about 2/3 of the Republicans really don't want Mitt Romney to be their nominee.
That's right.
Now, they may accept him eventually as their nominee, but they don't want him. There's no great energy there for him. With all his flaws, and they are many, Newt Gingrich provides energy. He's good in these forums.
He's not good. He's excellent.
And I think
he really is excellent.
Well, I think once Romney starts, he wasn't as good on this Monday debate that just occurred. So when you're getting whacked, it may be a little. He may be a little less good.
Those whacks hurt, though, Burdett.
I think that what we're watching, and this was particularly true in South Carolina, we were watching these 5 candidates, now 4 candidates, direct their attention to the conservative side of a very conservative party in South Carolina, and so that takes on a world of its own. Often facts don't seem to make much difference. You have your own characterizations of Obama and food stamps and all the arguments that are made. The question is, once you get into the general election, what happens? Because you've got to win. You've got to pull people in the middle. Obama's record is not great. His popularity is not great. Say Gingrich gets the nomination, and I don't know if it's 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever right now. As of the moment, his negative rating, 58% of the people regard him negatively. There's no way you can win an election that way. No. The second thing is that the economy appears to be getting better, slowly, but the unemployment numbers are better. If the economy keeps getting better, Obama's chances get better. If it stalls out or goes the other direction, then I think all bets are off. But this is
it's interesting to say the least.
The oddest year, and I was before coming over here, I just stopped at Starbucks and picked up a Wall Street Journal where there was and the Wall Street Journal editorial page is about the most conservative editorial page going, and there was an op-ed on saying, how Obama won the election, and basically the argument was that the better candidates have stayed out and we don't have a winning candidate.
Well, that's very interesting. Now I have to ask you if you think Joe Biden is going to be the vice presidential nominee, or if our newly minted diplomat, Hillary Clinton, has lost her ultra-liberal perception and in her mantle as a uber diplomat is going to be the vice presidential
No, I
candidate.
think that Joe Biden will be the vice president. I think that Hillary Clinton, I'd be stunned if she stayed much past maybe the first year of a second, if there was a second term.
I think
this is an exhausting job.
She's tired.
Yeah, I think she's done a good job
I do.
as Secretary of State. And if Obama wins, then Hillary she would leave the Secretary of State's position at around 65, age 65. She would have 3 years to prepare a presidential campaign if she wanted to do that, and she might well. So, but I'd give Hillary high marks. But I think those people who want Hillary to do that switch, I think that kind of thing is too clever by half sometimes.
Well, you know, if Obama wins this election, he very well may be the inheritor of an even more conservative Congress.
The political scientists, and I study the Congress, that's one of my subfields. The conventional wisdom right now is that Obama has a slight lead, and in the Senate and the House, the Republicans would retain control of the House, maybe a little more narrowly, and probably win the Senate. And so he would confront a Republican House and Senate. My sense is that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, and here's why. First of all, Obama, the day he's elected, is a lame duck. So they know they're not going to contend with him as a candidate. If you have both the House and the Senate, you have some responsibility for governing. Now they only have the House. They can say, oh, well, it's really Democrats. And I think you've got a 2-year window, maybe a 1.5-year window for Obama and the Republicans to get something done. After that, it's all the next year's politics.
All bets are off.
Yes.
Well, you know, I know that you are working on a new book, and it's about the change in Kansas politics between, what?
1960 and 1975.
And of course, change is the meat of political scientists.
It is. I mean, I think that the irony is that most of the time we get the status quo. And so, but when you do have big changes, and it's fascinating, it's a fascinating story. It's a story about reapportionment, the Supreme Court requiring reapportionment, and the balance of power moving toward Johnson County. And the key player in the second half of the book is Robert Bennett, who, as senator and then governor, but particularly as senator, developed an array of administrative changes and policies that really structured, with people in the House, Pete McGill, Pete Lux, some others, that created the Kansas government circa 1970 that I think has served us very well for the last 40 years.
Our best days in Kansas politics?
In some ways, yeah, although I will say that being over at the State House today, before I came over here and this spring, it is as interesting as it's ever been.
Well, I hate to say this, but we have used up our time, Burdett Loomis, and I know that all of us out there are just kind of hanging on our chairs because we haven't had enough. So maybe you'll come back again.
I'd be happy to.
And I say thank you, and thank you. It's our neighborhood, and Dr. Loomis is the professor of political science at the University of Kansas, and we are delighted to have had him as a guest. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you again soon.